Hello, people. Listen, I'm going to talk about a pretty interesting article that just came out from the New Yorker. It's called "Why the FBI Mob Podcast." Now, we all had an idea that they were watching. I mean, you've seen John Panise's show how it was shut down and how that whole library disappeared. Um, Now, what a lot of these mobsters and rats don't realize is that when you start talking about crimes from years ago, there's some crimes out there that aren't solved. So people like to talk. Frankie Pasquale is a perfect example. He started talking about a murder that implicated his father, and it was after two guys are in jail for it, and now in prison for it, and now these guys are going to be getting a new case and have a great shot at getting out because Frankie Pasquale gave uh, different reasonings about what happened than what he testified. And the same thing happened with John Panisi. He testified one thing, and then something else came out in his podcast. So the FBI, they're watching these podcasts. They're watching all the shows, whether you're former rats, former gangsters, it doesn't matter because they figure any information they can pick up is good for them. So I just want to read you this article from the New Yorker. It's a pretty interesting article, and it's called "Why the FBI Love Mod Podcast." It's from yesterday. A slew of true crime content hosted by former members of the mafia has attracted a surprising set of devotees, law enforcement agents looking for a deeper understanding of some of the biggest cases of their career. Okay, and the picture right here is they used the old picture of Sammy Gravano being led into a courthouse. This is, I believe, during the time that he started testifying. Um, so it says to join the mafia, one must take the oath of omerta, the code of silence. That's meant to keep information about business dealings within the family. Breaking it is a crime punishable by death. But these days, a lot of mafiosos are speaking pretty freely. Take Sammy Salvatore the Bull Gravano, the Gambino family underboss in the late 80s, who was involved in at least 19 murders during his tenure as John Gotti's right hand man. He now makes an honest living podcasting from Phoenix suburbs, where he relocated after spending 17 and a half years in a supermax. In an unharried Bensonhurst accent, Gravano, now 76 years old, recounts his biggest hits, such as the one carried out on mob boss Paul Castellano, Gotti's predecessor, and his own infamous breach of Omerta, the 1992 court testimony that sent Gotti to prison for life. Back in New York City, another ex-hit man who worked for Gotti, John Alite. There's John. John always manages to get his names into these articles, no matter whether you like him or not. There's Johnny Alite. He blends tales of his 6 murders, more than 8 shootings, and dozens of baseball battings. As we know, those numbers change all the time. With inspirational advice for youth on his Mafia Truths podcast. Meanwhile, Jimmy Calandra, a notorious enforcer for the Badano family, reportedly the most brutal of the 5 families who controlled organized crime in New York, insults various, we know who Jimmy's talking about here, fat rat scumbags, he's calling people, stone cold losers, on his YouTube series, A Bath Avenue Story. Those in search of a cleaner fear might check out the Sit Down with Michael Franzese, an interview show in which the Colombo Capo turned Orange County motivational speaker chats with celebrities and offers movie reviews and lifestyle tips to his viewers. Number one, fly under the radar. That's what he says. The growing glut of Mott content, with its mix of graphic violence, relationship drama, and aspirational wealth, has carved out a natural niche for itself in our reality TV and true crime landscape. Gravano's podcast, launched last year, boasts more than 400,000 subscribers. Franzese sit-downs sometimes garner more than 1 million views, each roughly equal to the numbers of opening weekend streams received by the Many Saints of Newark, which, according to Michael Franzese, made Italian Americans look like degenerates. But the genre has drawn alongside a usual true crime obsessives a more surprising set of devotees, FBI agents looking for deeper understanding of some of the biggest cases of their career. I spent hours and hours listening to these wise guys, the retired special agent Bill Fleischer told me the other day. Fleischer, who lives in New Jersey, spent most of his 1970s working on organized crime squads in New York, Boston, and Detroit. I would talk to them. I would polygraph them. I knew how they operated, but I could never get into their heads, he said. That's why I like these podcasts. I'm beginning, like a shrink, to understand what they're thinking. Most of these mobsters sharing these stories today have cooperated with authorities in the past and now have legal immunity that allows them to speak openly about their crimes, those to which they confessed anyway. In the process of telling their stories, they often reveal answers to questions that have stumped law enforcement officers for years. Instead of us going into prisons and interviewing Sammy the Bull, how convenient. He starts his own podcast. James A. Fitzgerald, a former FBI profiler and another dedicated listener, said from his house in Maryland, if you watch and listen to enough of them, you can pick up on the trajectory of where they're going and maybe even solve some of those old crimes. The other afternoon, Fitzgerald, Fleischer, and I gathered on Zoom to watch a YouTube video of Sammy the Bull's podcast, Our Thing, a reference to Costa Nostra. Neither agent had met Gravano personally, but have tracked his and his family's dealings so closely, they felt like they knew him as well as an old friend. In the clip's opening animation, a bull charges through a concrete wall before Gravano appears, seated in a leather chair in a recording studio, outfitted with a fireplace, a neon glowing above the mantle. On the walls are framed portraits of the crime bosses Al Capone and Charles Lucky Luciano, and the actor James Cagney, known for his iconic portrayals of gangsters on screen. Our host, small and wiry, is dressed in a white t-shirt and slacks. I'm glad that Sammy in a more traditional garb, Fitzgerald said. Back in the 80s and early 90s, when I was dealing with these guys, the Adidas running suits or the sweatsuits were the big uniform of the day. To be fair, in the video, Gravano is still wearing a pinky ring and gold chain. The podcast is focused on one of the biggest investigations in FBI history, the 1989 murder of undercover DE agent, low-level mafia associate. This is when they were talking about Gus Faraci, who killed undercover DE agent. And this is the show that they must be watching right at this time. Gravano begins, he starts to describe the associate. There was a guy named Gus Faraci, real tough guy, big guy, steroid freak, big, huge fucking arms, fairly good-looking guy. He was played by Tony Danza in the made-for-TV movie, Fitzgerald points out. Gravano explains that Faraci had met the undercover DE agent Everett Hatcher on a Staten Island overpass to sell him some cocaine. But something unsettled Faraci. He started thinking this guy may have been an undercover, not cop, but an undercover informant, Gravano says. They must have had the words in the car, and he shot and killed him. Faraci went on the lam, and FBI tracked down every family in Costa Nostra, raiding their clubs, gambling rings, arresting parolees for minor infractions in an effort to extract information about Faraci's whereabouts. Everybody in this game knew the rules had changed. Fitzgerald explained, we don't kill them. They don't kill us, Faraci. who wasn't even a made guy and violated the number one rule. So to the mafia knew it was hard times ahead for them. Okay, well, basically, excuse my dogs in the background. They're acting stupid. Okay, so I'm about to pick up on this article, but basically they're still talking about Gus Faraci, and we're going to get a little bit deeper into this. I'm just waiting for the dogs to shut up for a minute. According to Gravano, one day the FBI knocked on his door and ordered him to track down Faraci. Sammy, we want you to tell John Gotti that we want this guy found. We don't care how. The way they said it, Gravano says, I just made a question. Are you asking me to kill him? No, no, Sammy, the agent said. No, we're not going there. We don't give a fuck how he's found. Gravano didn't buy it, or maybe he didn't want to buy it. There would be nothing better for me to do for the government than to kill somebody for them, he tells his audience. That would have given me a license to do whatever the fuck I felt like doing. He goes on, they checked themselves right away, but that was the message. Fitzgerald interrupted. We honestly didn't want that, he said. We wanted to put this guy on trial and maybe even flip him to get information. But it tells how Sammy's mind works, Fleischer added. As a wise guy, a lot of his orders given and taken were done by nods, innuendo, and double entropes. I'm sorry. If a boss described a guy as always smiling, that could be a message to go knock his teeth out. In any case, the two sides were certainly entered in a very strange situation. The FBI and the mob were both looking for Gus. Who's gonna get him first? The mob, it turned out, 9 months after the Hatcher murder, Faraci was found shot dead in the streets. The moral of the story is this kid did not belong to us in the mafia, Gravano concludes. If you like this story, press like for subscribe. After the episode ended, I asked the agents what they would ask Sammy if they had a chance. Fitzgerald said he'd ask him why you flipped on Gotti. You violated the most sacred code of Omerta, he said. What did one FBI agent say to you to convince you to give it all up? A few days later, I called Gravano to ask him why he broke with Omerta back in the day and why he's still spilling mafia secrets today. I want my children and grandchildren to know my truth. Good, bad, and ugly, he said. Plus, it's a good way to earn. As for flipping on Gotti, we were brothers. He told me I killed for him. He told me what to do. I killed for him. I rigged trials. But when Gotti got caught on the tape implicating Gravano in multiple murders, that was the end. Gotti told Sammy that he'd have to do time so that Gotti can go free. I walked from the meeting, he said. Fuck John, fuck the mafia, I quit. The agents, Frank Spiro and Matty Turcaro, who were assigned to me, they were always around me, Gravano said. At Christmas, they would bring me coffee and cookies to the car while they staked out my house. I trusted them. I liked them. So when he needed to talk, he turned to the agents, who were more than happy to listen. They still are. Okay, well, that's a fascinating article because we talk about this. We have talked about this. Is the FBI and the feds watching these shows? Of course they are. Because people make mistakes, especially rats and gangsters. They like to brag. And when they start bragging, what they do is they say things they shouldn't be saying. And that's a perfect example of what happened just recently for Frankie Pasquale and Panisi. They basically started talking on their podcast, or a podcast they were a guest on, and they gave up information that was never given up before. When you think about that, can you blame the FBI for listening to these podcasts? No, and they're going to listen. So people, whenever we do these podcasts, wherever we're talking, whenever we have these guests on, remember, the government's watching. They're watching every damn one of us, even the people that aren't former gangsters and stuff like that, for the simple fact, one, we might have a guest on, and that guest may say the wrong thing. Perfect example would be Frankie Pasquale. He went on as a guest. He said the wrong thing, and now he's in big trouble. And you've seen what happened to Panisi. So people, when we do these shows, we have responsibilities, and they're watching everything, including the rats. And there's lots of rats doing these shows that weren't arrested for rats. We don't need to talk further than that because we've seen a lot of it in the last couple of days. Well, that's just going to be a short little segment. I thought I'd read you that. Sorry about the dogs in the background, people, but you know what? When we do these podcasts, you never know what to expect. And that's the New Yorker, and that's the most recent issue. If you want to read the full story, I just read you the full story. When Sammy Govano talks, people listen because he was a very big deal in the mafia. Same with just certain guys, Jimmy Calandra, same thing. Because, Jimmy's done things in his life that he never told to the feds. Okay, people, that's it for now. I just wanted to read you that story. Have a